The dust rose in small clouds with each step Martha Collins took along the rutted dirt road. Her worn boots already blistered from the first 8 miles of her journey through the Texas plains on this scorching June morning in 1882. She carried a canvas satchel filled with 23 pieces of embroidered linens that had taken her 4 months to complete by candlelight after working her family's struggling farm all day. Each stitch representing hope that she could sell them in Abilene for enough money to pay the bank note that would save her father's land from foreclosure. The sun climbed higher as Martha pressed forward, her cotton dress already soaked through with perspiration, the weight of the satchel cutting into her shoulder despite the folded cloth she had placed there as padding. She was 22 years old and had never walked this far alone, but her father had taken ill 3 weeks ago with fever that still had not broken. And her younger brother Samuel was only 15 and needed to tend to the livestock and their ailing mother who had twisted her ankle badly while trying to manage the chickens. The responsibility fell to Martha, and she had risen before dawn to begin the 20-mile trek, determined to reach the general store in Abilene where Mrs. Henderson had promised to look at her work and possibly purchase some pieces for resale to the wealthier ranch wives in the area. The road stretched endlessly before her, shimmering in the heat, bordered on both sides by prairie grass that whispered in the hot wind. Martha paused to take a sip from her canteen, rationing the water carefully because she still had 12 miles ahead of her. Her fingers trembled slightly as she unscrewed the cap, not just from exhaustion but from the weight of everything depending on this journey. The bank had given them until the end of the month, just 3 weeks away, and they needed $200. Martha had priced her embroidery carefully, each pillowcase at $3, each tablecloth at $8, each decorative handkerchief at $1.50. If she sold everything, she would have enough with a little left over for supplies they desperately needed. She had just taken another step forward when she heard the sound of horse hooves and wagon wheels approaching from behind. Martha moved to the side of the road, expecting the traveler to pass by as most did, but instead the sound slowed and then stopped beside her. She turned to see a wagon drawn by 2 sturdy horses, and sitting on the bench was a cowboy who looked to be in his mid-20s, with dark hair that curled slightly beneath a worn Stetson, sun-bronzed skin, and eyes the color of creek water in summer. "Miss, you look like you are about to collapse in this heat," he said, his voice carrying genuine concern. "Where are you heading on foot in weather like this?" Martha straightened her shoulders, trying to appear stronger than she felt. "I am walking to Abilene, sir." "I have business at the general store there." The cowboy's eyebrows rose. "Abilene is still a good 12 miles from here, and the temperature is only going to get worse. I am heading that direction myself with a delivery. I would be happy to give you a ride if you would accept." Pride warred with practicality in Martha's chest. She had been raised to be cautious of strangers, but she could feel the blisters on her feet burning with each breath, and the thought of 12 more miles in the climbing heat made her feel faint. She looked at the cowboy more carefully, noting the honest set of his features, the way his hands rested easy and unthreatening on the reins, and the fact that his wagon was loaded with lumber and supplies that suggested legitimate business. "I do not want to impose on your time or trouble you," Martha said carefully. "No trouble at all, miss. My name is James Crawford. I work for the Double R Ranch about 5 miles west of here, and I am delivering this lumber to the new schoolhouse they are building in Abilene. I would appreciate the company, truth be told. It is a long, dull ride by yourself." Something in his straightforward manner put Martha at ease. "My name is Martha Collins. If you are certain I would not be an inconvenience, I would be grateful for the ride." James immediately climbed down from the wagon bench and came around to help her up, offering his hand with a polite nod. His hand was calloused and strong, and he steadied her carefully as she settled onto the bench. Once she was seated, he retrieved her satchel and placed it gently beside her before climbing back up himself. Within moments, They were moving forward at a steady pace that ate up the road far faster than Martha's tired feet had managed. "If you do not mind my asking, what business do you have in Abilene?" James asked after a few minutes of comfortable silence. "That satchel looks like it carries something precious, the way you are holding it." Martha hesitated, then decided there was no harm in honesty. "I make embroidered linens, and I am hoping to sell them to Mrs. Henderson at the general store. My family has a farm about 8 miles back, but we have had some difficult times and we need the money." James glanced at the satchel with increased interest. Embroidered linens. "My mother used to do that kind of work before she passed. She always said it was a dying art because young women these days do not want to spend the hours it takes to make something truly beautiful." "Your mother was wise," Martha said softly. "It does take a great deal of time, but I find peace in the work. Each piece tells a story if you look closely enough." "Would you mind showing me?" James asked. "I have always admired fine needlework, and I confess I am curious to see what you have made." Martha carefully opened her satchel and pulled out one of her favorite pieces, a pillowcase with an intricate design of roses and morning glories trailing along the edge, each petal shaded with different colored threads to create depth and realism. James pulled the horses to a brief stop so he could examine it properly, and Martha watched as his face transformed with genuine appreciation. "This is extraordinary," he said quietly, running his fingers lightly over the stitching. "The detail is remarkable. You can see each individual vein in the leaves." "Thank you," Martha said, feeling warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the temperature. "That piece took me nearly 3 weeks to complete. I work on them at night after the farm chores are finished." James handed the pillowcase back carefully and got the horses moving again, but Martha could see him glancing at her satchel repeatedly as they traveled. They talked easily as the miles passed, and Martha found herself relaxing in a way she had not expected. James told her about his work at the Double R Ranch, how he had been there for 5 years after drifting through several other positions, and how he had finally found a place that felt like home. He spoke of his love for horses and the open range, but also of his dreams to eventually have his own small spread where he could breed quality horses. "What about you?" James asked. "Have you always lived on your family's farm?" "All my life," Martha answered. "My parents homesteaded there 24 years ago, right after they married. I was born in that house, and so was my brother. It is the only home I have ever known, which is why it is so important that we find a way to keep it." "How much does the bank want?" James asked gently. Martha appreciated that he did not dance around the subject. $200 by the end of the month. "My father took out a loan 3 years ago to buy new equipment and seed after a drought destroyed our crops, but then he fell ill and we could not make the payments. We have been trying to catch up ever since, but it has been one thing after another." James was quiet for a moment, and Martha worried she had shared too much, made herself sound pitiful. But when he spoke again, his voice was thoughtful rather than pitying. "May I ask how much you hope to make from your embroidery today? If Mrs. Henderson buys everything, I should make enough to cover the payment with a little left over," Martha said. "I have priced each piece fairly, perhaps even low, because I need to sell them all if possible." They rode in silence for a while longer, and Martha watched the landscape roll by, grateful beyond measure that she did not have to walk through it. Her feet still throbbed, but at least they were not getting worse. The town of Abilene began to appear in the distance, its buildings shimmering in the heat, and Martha felt her stomach tighten with nerves. Everything depended on the next few hours. "Martha," James said suddenly, his voice carrying a note of decision that made her turn to look at him. "Before we get to town, I want to make you an offer. Would you allow me to look through all your embroidery pieces?" "Of course," Martha said, confused but willing. "But why?" "Because I think I might want to buy them myself," James said. "All of them." Martha stared at him, certain she had misheard. "All of them? But sir, you cannot possibly need 23 pieces of embroidered linens. That would be foolish spending, and I could not in good conscience allow you to waste your money out of pity." James pulled the wagon to a stop right there in the road, still a good 2 miles from town, and turned to face her directly. "Miss Collins, I am not acting out of pity." "Well, perhaps a small amount of pity because your situation moves me, but primarily because your work is genuinely beautiful and because I do in fact have a use for it." "What use?" Martha asked skeptically. "My sister Emily is getting married in 2 months to a rancher up near Fort Worth," James explained. "She has been scrambling to put together a proper household, and she mentioned just last week when I visited her that she needed linens but could not afford the fancy imported ones from back east. She would be thrilled to have pieces as beautiful as yours, and I have been trying to figure out what to give her as a wedding gift. This would be perfect." Martha wanted to believe him, but it seemed too convenient, too much like charity disguised as commerce. "Mr. Crawford, that is very kind, but James," he interrupted. "Please call me James, and I am completely serious. Pull out your pieces and tell me your prices. If they are fair, I will pay them. If I think they are too low, which I suspect they might be based on what I have already seen, I will pay you what they are actually worth." "I cannot accept charity," Martha said firmly. "And I am not offering it," James replied just as firmly. "I am offering to buy quality goods from a skilled craftswoman. There is a significant difference. Now, will you show me what you have, or will pride cost your family their farm?" The blunt question struck Martha like cold water. He was right, and she knew it. If he genuinely wanted to buy her work, refusing out of pride would be not only foolish but selfish when her family's welfare hung in the balance. Slowly, she nodded and began pulling pieces from her satchel one by one. For the next half hour, James examined each item with careful attention. Martha explained her pricing structure, and he listened without comment until she had shown him everything. Then he pulled a small notebook and pencil from his pocket and began calculating. "By my count, you have valued everything at $187 total," James said. "That strikes me as quite low for this quality of work. I think $250 is more appropriate." "No," Martha said immediately, "that is too much. You are being generous beyond reason." "I am being fair," James corrected. "Have you ever actually sold embroidery before?" Martha hesitated. "Not to a store, no. I have sold a few pieces to neighbors." "Then you do not know the markup Mrs. Henderson would have applied if she had bought your pieces for resale," James said. "She would have paid you your asking price and then sold them to her customers for at least double that, probably more. What I am offering you is what the pieces are actually worth to the end buyer. You are simply cutting out the middleman." Martha bit her lip, torn between hope and skepticism. "Why would you do this? You do not know me." James met her eyes steadily. "Because I can afford it, because your work deserves to be properly compensated, and because I believe that when you can help someone, you should. My sister will be genuinely delighted with these gifts, so it is not as though I am throwing money away on something useless. Everyone benefits from this transaction." Something in his earnest expression convinced Martha that he was telling the truth. Slowly, she nodded. "If you are certain, then I accept your offer. $250. "I am certain," James said with a smile that transformed his entire face. "Now, I do not carry that kind of money on me regularly, but I can stop at the bank in Abilene and withdraw it. Or if you prefer, we can go together to the general store and I can purchase them through Mrs. Henderson so you have a proper receipt." "The bank would be fine," Martha said, still feeling dazed by this turn of events. "A receipt would be proper, though." "Then I will write you one," James said, pulling out his notebook again. He carefully wrote out a receipt listing all the items and the agreed-upon price, signed it with his full name and the date, and handed it to Martha. "There, all official and proper." Martha took the paper with trembling fingers, staring at the numbers written there. $250. More than enough to pay the bank and buy the supplies they needed, and perhaps even pay the doctor who had been treating her father. She felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back fiercely, "Thank you," she whispered. "You cannot know what this means to my family." "I am glad I could help," James said simply, and then he got the horses moving again toward town. They reached Abilene within half an hour, and James drove straight to the bank. He helped Martha down from the wagon and escorted her inside, where he conducted his business with efficient professionalism. The bank clerk counted out the money twice, and then James handed the full amount to Martha, who had never held so much money in her life. Her hands shook as she carefully placed it in her small purse, checking 3 times to make sure the clasp was secure. When they emerged from the bank, James glanced at the sun, which was now past its zenith. "I need to deliver this lumber to the schoolhouse site, but that will only take about half an hour. Would you like to get some lunch at the hotel restaurant afterward?" "My treat, since you saved me the dull ride I was dreading." Martha knew she should probably start the long walk home, but the thought of sitting in a proper restaurant for the first time in years was incredibly tempting. Besides, her feet still hurt, and a little rest before the return journey made practical sense. "I would like that, but I insist on paying for my own meal. You have already been more than generous." "Fair enough," James agreed with a grin. "You can wait here in the shade if you like, or you can come with me to the schoolhouse. It is not far, just on the edge of town." "I will come with you," Martha said. "I am curious to see the new school." They climbed back into the wagon, and James drove to a lot where the frame of a new building was taking shape. Several men were working on the construction, and they greeted James with waves and friendly calls. He backed the wagon up to the site and began unloading the lumber with practiced efficiency, and Martha found herself admiring the easy strength with which he handled the heavy boards. Other men came to help, and soon the wagon was empty and James was collecting payment from the foreman, a grizzled older man who kept glancing at Martha with curiosity but was too polite to ask questions. "All done," James announced, climbing back up beside her. "Now for that lunch." The hotel restaurant was a modest establishment but clean and respectable, and Martha felt self-conscious of her dusty dress and travel-worn appearance as they entered. But the proprietress, a kind-faced woman in her 50s, greeted them warmly and showed them to a table by the window without any judgment in her expression. Martha ordered a simple meal of chicken and vegetables, and James did the same, and then they sat in comfortable conversation while they waited. "Tell me more about your farm," James said. "What do you grow there?" Martha described their small operation, the difficulties they had faced with unpredictable weather and changing markets, and the slow, grinding nature of their financial troubles. James listened with genuine interest, asking intelligent questions that showed he understood farming despite his own focus on ranching. When their food arrived, Martha realized she was ravenous, having eaten only a small breakfast before dawn, and she had to consciously slow herself down to eat at a proper pace. "What will you do after you pay the bank?" James asked. "Will your father recover soon enough to manage the farm again?" "I hope so," Martha said. "The fever has been stubborn, but the doctor thinks he has passed the worst of it. Even once he is well, though, it will be a struggle. We need a good harvest this year, and we need it to bring a decent price. There is not much room for error anymore." James nodded thoughtfully, and Martha could see him turning something over in his mind. "Have you ever considered alternative sources of income? Your embroidery, for instance. If you could sell pieces regularly, even just a few a month, that would provide a cushion against bad harvests." "I have thought about it," Martha admitted, "but I do not know how to find buyers beyond hoping Mrs. Henderson will take them, and I can only work at night after all the farm chores are done, so I cannot produce pieces very quickly." "What if I could help with that?" James said slowly. "I know quite a few ranch families in this area, and many of them have money to spend on quality goods. I could introduce your work to some of them, maybe help you establish a regular clientele." Martha looked at him in surprise. "Why would you do that for me? You have already done so much." James seemed to struggle with his words for a moment, and Martha noticed a faint color rising in his cheeks. "Because I would like to see you again," he finally said. And helping you with your business would give me a good reason to visit your farm if you would not mind that." Martha felt her own face warm at his honesty. She had been trying not to think too hard about how much she had enjoyed James's company during their short acquaintance, how easy it had been to talk to him, how safe she had felt in his presence. The idea that he might feel the same pull toward her made her heart beat faster. "I would not mind that at all," she said quietly. James's face broke into a wide smile. "Then it is settled. I will start asking around and see what interest I can generate. In the meantime, how are you planning to get home? Because I have to tell you, Martha, the idea of you walking 20 miles in either direction troubles me greatly." "I will be fine," Martha said. "I can rest here for a bit longer and then start back. If I keep a steady pace, I should be home by dark." "That is not acceptable," James said firmly. "You are already exhausted from this morning's walk and your feet are clearly hurting even though you are trying to hide it. Let me drive you home. The lumber is delivered and I have no pressing business back at the ranch today." "That would take you hours out of your way," Martha protested. "So it will take me hours out of my way," James said with a shrug. "I have hours to spare. Besides, I would like to meet your family and see your farm. If I am going to help you find buyers for your work, I should understand your situation better." Martha wanted to refuse out of principle, but the relief at not having to walk another 20 miles was too strong. "If you are certain it would not be too much trouble." "It would be my pleasure," James said. "Now finish your lunch and then we will head back." The ride home passed even more pleasantly than the ride to town had. Martha felt the weight of stress lifting from her shoulders now that she had the money to save the farm, and she found herself laughing at James's stories about various mishaps and adventures at the Double R Ranch. He had a gift for storytelling, painting vivid pictures with his words, and Martha enjoyed the sound of his voice and the animation in his face when he described something that amused him. As they drew closer to her family's property, Martha began to feel nervous about introducing James to her father. What would he think of this stranger who had helped her so much? Would he be suspicious of James's motives? But when they finally pulled into the dusty yard in front of the small farmhouse, her father was sitting on the porch in his rocking chair, the first time he had been out of bed in weeks, and Martha took that as a good sign. Samuel came running from the barn, his eyes wide at the sight of his sister arriving in a wagon with a stranger. Martha climbed down and immediately rushed to her father, who stood shakily to greet her. "Papa, you should not be up," Martha scolded gently, but her father waved off her concern. "I am feeling better today and I wanted to see the sky," he said. His eyes moved to James, who had climbed down from the wagon and stood respectfully at a distance. "Who is your friend, Martha?" "Papa, this is James Crawford. He works at the Double R Ranch, and he gave me a ride to Abilene and back." "James, this is my father, Thomas Collins, and my brother Samuel." James stepped forward and offered his hand to Thomas, who shook it with a grip that was weak but steady. "It is a pleasure to meet you, sir. Your daughter has quite a talent for embroidery. Did Mrs. Henderson buy your pieces?" Thomas asked Martha anxiously. "Better than that, Papa," Martha said, unable to keep the joy from her voice. "Mr. Crawford bought all of them for his sister's wedding gift. We got $250. Thomas's face went pale and he sat down heavily in his rocking chair. $250. Martha, that cannot be right." "It is right, Papa," Martha assured him, pulling out the money and the receipt to show him. "Mr. Crawford paid a fair price for quality work. We have enough to pay the bank and more." Samuel whooped with excitement and grabbed Martha in a bear hug, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to put her down. Their mother appeared in the doorway, leaning on a crutch, her face a mixture of hope and disbelief. "Is it true, Martha?" she asked. "Did you really sell everything?" "Every piece, Mama," Martha confirmed. "We are going to be all right." Her mother burst into tears and Martha rushed to embrace her, and then Samuel joined in, and even her father's eyes were wet when Martha looked at him. James stood to the side, watching the family reunion with a soft expression, and Martha caught his eye and mouthed, "Thank you," once more. Thomas insisted that James stay for supper, and though James initially protested that he did not want to intrude on a family evening, Thomas would not hear of refusal. "Any man who helps my family the way you have helped us today is always welcome at our table," he said firmly, and so James agreed. Martha's mother, despite her injured ankle, insisted on helping prepare the meal, and Martha worked alongside her in their small kitchen, frying salt pork and making gravy while potatoes boiled on the stove. It was a simple meal, but they set the table with their best dishes in James's honor, and the conversation over dinner was lively and warm. James charmed the entire family with his easy manner and genuine interest in their lives, and Martha watched him interact with her parents and brother with a growing sense of something she was almost afraid to name. After dinner, James helped Samuel with the evening chores, insisting that it was the least he could do for the meal. Martha watched from the kitchen window as the two of them worked together in the barn, and she saw Samuel laughing at something James said. Her brother had not laughed much lately, weighed down by worry about their situation, and seeing his shoulders shake with mirth made Martha's throat tight with emotion. When the work was finished, James reluctantly said he needed to head back to the ranch before full dark. Martha walked him out to his wagon, suddenly shy now that they were alone again. "Thank you for everything today," she said. "I do not think I can ever properly express what you have done for us." "You do not need to thank me," James said. "But I meant what I said about wanting to help you find more buyers. May I come back to visit in a few days, maybe on Sunday afternoon?" "I would like that very much," Martha said, and she was rewarded with another of those smiles that made her heart skip. "Then I will see you Sunday," James said. He hesitated, then reached out and took her hand, holding it gently for just a moment before releasing it and climbing up into his wagon. Martha stood in the yard and watched him drive away until he disappeared into the gathering dusk, and only then did she allow herself to smile so widely that her cheeks hurt. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Martha's father grew stronger each day, though the doctor cautioned him not to overexert himself yet. With the money from the embroidery sale, they were able to pay off the bank note in full, and the relief of having that weight lifted made the entire family lighter in spirit. Martha used some of the remaining money to restock their supplies and pay the doctor, and still had enough left over to set aside for emergencies. She found herself thinking about James constantly, replaying their conversations in her mind, remembering the warmth in his eyes when he looked at her. She had never felt this way about anyone before, this combination of excitement and nervousness and hope all tangled together. She caught herself daydreaming while doing chores, and Samuel teased her mercilessly about being distracted. Sunday arrived bright and clear, and Martha was embarrassed by how much care she took with her appearance. She wore her best dress, a simple blue cotton that brought out her eyes, and she braided her hair carefully, winding it into a crown around her head. Her mother watched with knowing amusement but said nothing, just smiled and patted Martha's hand when she came downstairs. James arrived in the early afternoon, driving a different wagon than before, this one smaller and lighter, clearly his personal vehicle rather than a ranch work wagon. He had also clearly taken care with his appearance, wearing a clean shirt and vest, his hair still damp from washing. He brought a basket of apples from the ranch orchard as a gift for the family, and Martha's mother accepted them with delight. After visiting politely with Martha's parents for half an hour, James asked if he might take Martha for a drive to see more of the surrounding countryside. Thomas and Mary exchanged glances and then gave their permission, and Martha found herself sitting beside James once more as they drove away from the farm. "I have been thinking about you all week," James admitted once they were out of earshot of the house. "I hope that does not seem too forward." "I have been thinking about you as well," Martha confessed, feeling her face warm. "My brother says I have been useless for work because I keep getting distracted." James laughed, a rich, warm sound. I have gotten in trouble twice at the ranch for the same reason. My boss finally asked me what woman had caught my attention, and when I told him about you, he said I should stop mooning around and court you properly if I was that smitten. Are you? Martha asked, her heart pounding. Smitten. James pulled the wagon to a stop under a large oak tree that provided blessed shade from the afternoon sun. He turned to face Martha directly, his expression serious but warm. I am. From the moment I saw you walking along that road, looking so determined despite being obviously exhausted, something in my chest shifted. And then when I got to know you during our drive, when I saw your work and heard you talk about your family, that shift became something stronger. I know we have only known each other a week, and maybe this is too fast, but I would very much like to court you properly, Martha Collins, if you would be willing. Martha felt tears prick her eyes, but these were tears of happiness. I would be very willing, James Crawford, more than willing. James's smile was brilliant, and he reached out to take her hand, threading his fingers through hers. They sat like that for a long moment, just looking at each other, and Martha felt as though she could see her entire future suddenly opening up before her in ways she had never imagined. I spoke to several families at church this morning, James said after a while. Told them about your embroidery and showed them the piece I kept for myself as an example. You kept one? Martha asked in surprise. I kept one of the handkerchiefs, James admitted. I hope you do not mind. But yes, I showed it around, and I already have 3 families who want to commission pieces from you. Mrs. Patterson wants a tablecloth for her dining room, Mrs. Rodriguez wants pillowcases for her daughter's hope chest, and Mr. Thompson wants a set of decorative handkerchiefs for his wife's birthday. James, that is wonderful, Martha breathed, but I need to be careful not to price myself too low. Can you help me figure out what to charge? Absolutely, James said. In fact, I thought we could drive into Abilene next Saturday and talk to Mrs. Henderson together. She has been in the business a long time, and she can give you advice on pricing and what sells best. Would that work for you? That would be perfect, Martha said. They spent the rest of the afternoon talking and laughing, and James drove Martha around the area, showing her landmarks and telling her stories about the region. When he finally brought her home as the sun was setting, he walked her to the door and said goodbye to her family with promises to return soon. Over the following weeks, James became a regular visitor at the Collins farm. He came every Sunday without fail, and often on Wednesday evenings as well, fitting his visits around his work schedule at the ranch. Martha's parents clearly approved of him, and Samuel had developed a case of hero worship, following James around whenever he visited and pestering him with questions about ranching and horses and life beyond the small farm. True to his word, James helped Martha establish a thriving business selling her embroidery to wealthy ranch families in the area. Together, they visited Mrs. Henderson, who was impressed by Martha's work and offered valuable advice on pricing and design. Martha raised her prices to reflect the true value of her pieces and found that customers were happy to pay for quality craftsmanship. She began to make a steady income that took significant pressure off her family's finances. But more important than the business success was the deepening relationship between Martha and James. They talked about everything during their time together, discovering shared values and dreams. James told her about his difficult childhood after his mother's death, how his father had become bitter and distant, and how he had left home at 16 to make his own way. Martha shared her fears about her family's future and her dreams of someday seeing the ocean, which she had only read about in books. They also shared silence, comfortable and warm, sitting together on the porch in the evenings or walking through the fields at sunset. James taught Martha to ride a horse properly, and she taught him the names of the wildflowers that grew in the meadows. They held hands constantly when they were together, and James always kissed Martha's forehead gently when he said goodbye, a gesture that made her feel cherished and protected. 3 months after their first meeting, on a warm September evening with the crickets singing in the grass, James drove Martha to a hilltop that overlooked the valley where both the ranch and her family's farm were visible in the distance. He spread a blanket on the ground, and they sat together watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Martha," James said quietly, his voice nervous in a way she had rarely heard, "these past 3 months have been the happiest of my life. You have become the center of everything I think about and plan for. I cannot imagine my future without you in it." Martha's breath caught as James shifted to kneel on the blanket, pulling a small box from his pocket. He opened it to reveal a simple gold ring with a small diamond that caught the fading light. "I do not have much to offer you yet," James continued. "I have been saving my wages for 5 years, and I have enough now to buy a small piece of land and start building our own place. It would not be fancy, not at first, but I would work every day to make it into a real home for us. Martha Collins, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Martha's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling so hard her face hurt. "Yes," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, James, I will marry you." James slipped the ring onto her finger, and then he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her for the first time, gentle and sweet and full of promise. Martha kissed him back, pouring all her love and hope into that moment, and when they finally pulled apart, both of them were crying and laughing at the same time. They sat on that hilltop until the stars came out, making plans and dreaming together. James told her about the land he had his eye on, a pretty piece of property with a creek running through it and good grass for horses. Martha talked about the home they could build together, how she could continue her embroidery business while they established the horse breeding operation James wanted to start. They talked about children they hoped to have someday, about growing old together, about building a life that would be stable and happy and full of love. When James finally drove Martha home that night, her parents took one look at her glowing face and the ring on her finger, and immediately embraced them both with congratulations and tears of joy. Samuel shook James's hand with exaggerated seriousness, and told him he had better take good care of his sister or answer to him, which made everyone laugh. They decided to wait until the following spring to marry, giving James time to purchase the land and build at least a basic cabin they could live in while they worked to expand it. Thomas's health had improved enough that he could manage the farm again with Samuel's help, so Martha would not be abandoning her family in their time of need. In fact, with the income from her embroidery business and James's steady wages, both families were in better financial shape than they had been in years. The months between the engagement and the wedding flew by in a whirlwind of preparation and hard work. James bought the land he had wanted, a beautiful 40 acres with the creek he had promised, and a grove of cottonwood trees that provided shade. He spent every spare moment building their cabin, and on Sundays, Thomas and Samuel would go with Martha to help with the construction. Martha sewed curtains and linens for their new home, creating pieces that were even more elaborate and beautiful than the ones she sold, pouring her love into every stitch. Word of their engagement spread through the community, and Martha received several commissions for wedding gifts from people she had never met, friends of James who wanted to congratulate him by supporting his future wife's business. She worked late into the nights, building up inventory and savings, determined to contribute equally to their new life together. Winter came and went, cold but not harsh, and by early March the cabin was finished. It was small but sturdy, with a main room that served as kitchen and living area, a separate bedroom, and a loft that could be used for storage or additional sleeping space when they eventually had children. James had built the furniture himself, simple but well-crafted pieces that would last for years. Martha had never seen anything more beautiful than that little cabin with its wide porch and view of the creek. They were married on a perfect April morning in 1883 at the small church in Abilene. Martha wore a dress she had sewn herself, simple white cotton with delicate embroidery around the collar and cuffs, and she carried wildflowers that James had picked for her at dawn. James wore his best suit, and Martha thought he was the most handsome man she had ever seen, standing at the altar with his eyes shining as he watched her walk down the aisle on her father's arm. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, James kissed Martha with such tenderness that several women in the congregation sighed audibly. The reception was held at the hotel restaurant where they had eaten lunch on that first day, and nearly the entire community turned out to celebrate with them. There was music and dancing and more food than Martha had seen in one place in years, and through it all, James never let go of her hand except when they took the floor for their first dance as husband and wife. As the sun began to set, James and Martha said goodbye to their families and friends and climbed into the wagon for the drive to their new home. Samuel had decorated the wagon with ribbons and tin cans, and the noise they made as they drove away was tremendous, but neither James nor Martha cared. They were too busy smiling at each other, beginning the journey into their new life together. The cabin was waiting for them, warm and welcoming with a fire already burning in the fireplace that Thomas had lit earlier. James carried Martha over the threshold, both of them laughing, and then they stood in the middle of their home and just held each other, overwhelmed by the reality that this was theirs, that they had made it to this moment. "I love you," James whispered into Martha's hair. "I will love you every day for the rest of my life." "I love you too," Martha whispered back. "Thank you for stopping your wagon that day. Thank you for seeing me." "How could I not see you?" James said, pulling back to look at her face. "You were the most beautiful thing I had ever encountered, walking through that heat with such determination. You captured my heart before you even knew my name." They spent their wedding night learning each other, tender and passionate and full of wonder, and when Martha fell asleep in James's arms as the fire died to embers, she felt more content than she had ever imagined possible. This was home. This was love. This was the life she was meant to live. The first year of their marriage was full of hard work, but also profound happiness. James continued working at the Double R Ranch while slowly building up his own herd of horses on their property. Martha maintained her embroidery business, which had grown to the point where she had a waiting list of customers. She also managed their home and garden, and together they worked to improve their land, clearing brush, reinforcing the creek banks, and building a proper barn for the horses. Martha's family remained close, with frequent visits in both directions. Thomas's health continued to improve, and Samuel grew into a strong young man who was a tremendous help on the family farm. James hired Samuel occasionally to help with work on their property, and the bond between the two men deepened into genuine friendship rather than just family obligation. In the fall of that first year, Martha discovered she was pregnant. She told James one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, and his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He swept her into his arms and spun her around, then immediately set her down carefully and apologized for being too rough, which made her laugh until she cried. They talked late into the night about names and futures, and the family they were creating together. The pregnancy was not easy. Martha suffered from terrible morning sickness for the first few months, and James worried over her constantly, trying to do everything he could to make her comfortable. But as winter turned to spring, Martha began to feel better, and they both grew excited about the coming baby. On a warm June morning in 1884, almost exactly 2 years after the day they had first met, Martha went into labor. James rode like the wind to fetch the midwife and Martha's mother, and then he paced the porch anxiously while the women worked inside. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when James considered breaking down the door because Martha's cries of pain were tearing him apart. But finally, in the early evening, he heard a different cry, the strong wail of a newborn baby. The midwife emerged a few minutes later with a smile on her face. "You have a son, Mr. Crawford, a big, healthy boy, and your wife did beautifully." James rushed inside to find Martha propped up against the pillows, exhausted but radiant, cradling a tiny bundle wrapped in one of the blankets she had embroidered with such care. He approached slowly, almost afraid to disturb the perfect picture they made, and then he was kneeling beside the bed, looking down at his son's tiny, perfect face. "He is beautiful," James whispered, reaching out to touch the baby's downy hair. "You are amazing, Martha. Look what we made." "We should name him after your father," Martha said softly. "A new beginning for that name." James's eyes filled with tears. His relationship with his father had been difficult, and the old man had died 2 years ago without ever reconciling with his son. The idea of reclaiming that name and filling it with love instead of bitterness moved James deeply. "William James Crawford," he said. "Will for short." "Perfect," Martha agreed, and then she was crying too, and they bent over their son together, a family complete and whole. Little Will was a good baby, healthy and strong, with his father's dark hair and his mother's blue eyes. James proved to be a devoted father, getting up in the night to walk Will when he was fussy, changing diapers without complaint, and spending hours just watching his son sleep with an expression of wonder on his face. Martha found herself falling even more deeply in love with her husband as she watched him with their child. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm over the next few years. James finally saved enough to leave the Double R Ranch and work their property full-time, focusing on breeding quality horses. His reputation for fair dealing and good stock grew, and before long he had buyers coming from across the state to purchase his horses. Martha continued her embroidery business but scaled back somewhat to focus on raising Will. And then his sister Rose, who was born in 1886, and his brother Henry, who arrived in 1888. The cabin that had seemed so spacious when they were newlyweds became cramped with 3 active children, and James spent 2 years building an addition that doubled its size, adding 2 more bedrooms and a proper dining room. Martha embroidered curtains for every window and made quilts for every bed, and their home became known throughout the area as a place of warmth and welcome. Martha's parents remained healthy and active well into their 60s, delighting in their grandchildren and visiting often. Samuel married a sweet girl named Anna when he was 22, and they took over the family farm, running it successfully and eventually having 4 children of their own. The 2 families celebrated holidays together, and the cousins grew up as close as siblings. James's sister Emily and her husband also became frequent visitors, especially after Emily's firstborn son developed a passion for horses and begged to spend summers at the Crawford Ranch learning from his Uncle James. Martha and Emily became genuine friends, and Martha was proud to know that the embroidered linens she had made for Emily's wedding gift all those years ago were still in daily use in her home, treasured and carefully maintained. As the children grew, Will showed his father's talent with horses, while Rose inherited her mother's skill with a needle, and Henry displayed a gift for numbers that suggested he might become a businessman. James and Martha encouraged each child's individual talents, determined that their children would have opportunities they themselves had lacked. On a summer evening in 1895, James and Martha sat on their porch watching the sun set over their land, much as they had done on the night of their engagement 13 years earlier. The children were playing by the creek, their laughter floating on the warm breeze, and the horses grazed peacefully in the pasture. "Do you ever think about that day I saw you walking along the road?" James asked, reaching over to take Martha's hand. "All the time," Martha admitted. "I think about how close I came to refusing your offer of a ride because of pride. What would have happened if I had kept walking? We would have found each other somehow," James said with certainty. "I believe we were meant to be together. The universe conspired to put me on that road at that exact moment." "Maybe," Martha said with a smile. "Or maybe you are just a good man who stopped to help a woman in need, and everything wonderful that came after was us choosing each other day after day." "I like your version better," James said, lifting her hand to kiss it. "Because it means we built this life through our own choices and efforts, not just blind fate. We did build it, did we not?" Martha said, looking around at the land they had improved, the home they had expanded, the family they had created. From one wagon ride and 23 pieces of embroidery, we built all of this. You built all of this, James corrected. Your talent, your determination, your courage to walk 20 miles in the heat to save your family. I just had the good sense to buy everything you were selling and convince you to take a chance on a wandering cowboy. The best chance I ever took, Martha said, leaning her head on his shoulder. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank lower, painting the sky in brilliant shades of purple and gold. Will came running up from the creek, excited about a frog he had caught, and Rose was right behind him with a crown of wildflowers she had woven. Henry trailed after, his pockets full of interesting rocks he had found. The children surrounded their parents, all talking at once, and James and Martha looked at each other over the chaos and smiled. Years continued to pass, measured in seasons and harvests, in horses sold and embroidery commissioned, in children growing and family gatherings. Will married at 23, bringing home a spirited young woman named Catherine who was not afraid of hard work and who fit into the family as though she had always been there. They built a house on the far corner of the property and began raising horses alongside Will's father, expanding the business even further. Rose married a lawyer from Fort Worth when she was 21, a kind man named Daniel who appreciated her artistic nature and encouraged her to open a small shop in town where she sold embroidered items and other handcrafts. Martha helped her daughter establish the business, passing on everything she had learned over the years, and Rose's shop became quite successful, providing income for her family and employment for several other local women who needed work. Henry went to college in Austin, the first in the family to receive higher education, and returned with a degree in business and a wife named Margaret who was a teacher. They settled in Abilene, and Henry opened a bank that served the rural community with fairness and compassion, always remembering his family's own struggles with debt years before. He made it his mission to help farmers and ranchers succeed rather than simply profiting from their difficulties. Thomas Collins passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1899 at the age of 76, surrounded by his family. Mary followed him a year later, and though their loss grieved Martha deeply, she was comforted by the knowledge that they had lived to see their family not just survive but thrive. Samuel continued to run the family farm successfully, and his children were growing into capable young adults who would carry on the tradition. James's health remained strong well into his 60s, and he continued to work with the horses he loved, though he left more of the heavy labor to Will and the ranch hands they now employed. Martha's eyes were not as sharp as they once had been, making the detailed embroidery work more difficult, but she still took commissions occasionally for special customers, and she spent happy hours teaching her granddaughters the craft that had once saved her family. In the summer of 1912, James and Martha celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary with a party that drew nearly 200 people from across the region. Their children and grandchildren filled the expanded house and spilled out onto the lawn, and friends and neighbors brought food and music and heartfelt congratulations. Will gave a toast that made everyone laugh and cry, talking about the love his parents had always shown each other and the example they had set for their children and grandchildren. "My father has told me the story 1,000 times," Will said, raising his glass. "About how he saw my mother walking along a dusty road, carrying a satchel of embroidered linens, determined to save her family's farm. He says he fell in love before he even spoke to her, just watching the set of her shoulders and the strength in her eyes. And then he bought everything she had and drove her home, and the rest is history. But what that story taught me," Will continued, "is that love is not just a feeling, it is a choice and an action. My father chose to stop and help. My mother chose to trust him. And then they chose each other, over and over again, through hard times and good times, through struggles and successes. They chose to build a life together, and they chose to fill it with love and laughter and family. That is the legacy they have given us, and it is worth more than all the land and horses and success in the world. Everyone raised their glasses and cheered, and James pulled Martha close and kissed her right there in front of everyone, which made their grandchildren giggle and their friends whistle. Martha felt her face flush, but she kissed him back, not caring who was watching, grateful for this man who had changed her life so completely 30 years ago. That night, after all the guests had left and they were alone in their bedroom, James and Martha lay in bed talking about the day and all the memories it had stirred up. "Do you have any regrets?" James asked, running his fingers through Martha's hair, which was now more silver than brown. "Not a single one," Martha said without hesitation. "Every choice I made led me here to this bed with you. How could I regret that? I worried sometimes that you might resent me for taking you away from your family," James admitted. "I know how close you were to your parents." "You did not take me away," Martha said firmly. "You gave me a new family while keeping me close to my old one. My parents loved you like a son, and they were so proud of everything we built together. I could never resent you for that." James pulled her closer, and they lay in the darkness listening to the familiar sounds of their home settling around them, the creak of floorboards and the whisper of wind through the trees outside. "I love you, Martha Crawford," James whispered. "I have loved you for 30 years, and I will love you for 30 more if the Lord grants us that time." "I love you too, James," Martha whispered back. "Thank you for buying everything I was selling that day. Thank you for seeing past a tired farm girl to the life we could build together." "The best investment I ever made," James said with a smile she could hear in his voice, even though she could not see his face in the darkness. They drifted off to sleep in each other's arms, as they had done nearly every night for 3 decades, comfortable and content and deeply, permanently in love. The years continued their steady march forward. James and Martha remained active and engaged with their family and community, though they gradually handed over more responsibilities to the younger generation. Will took over full management of the horse breeding operation and expanded it even further, gaining a reputation throughout Texas for quality stock. Rose's handicraft shop continued to thrive, and she opened a second location in Fort Worth. Henry's bank grew into one of the most respected financial institutions in the region, known for its fair practices and community support. James and Martha became the wise elders of their extended family, the ones everyone came to for advice and support. Their home remained a gathering place for holidays and celebrations, filled with children and grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren. Martha made embroidered baby blankets for each new arrival, working slowly now because of her aging hands and eyes, but putting no less love into each stitch. In the spring of 1920, Martha fell ill with pneumonia. The doctor came from town and did everything he could, but she was 79 years old and her body was tired. James refused to leave her side, sitting beside her bed day and night, holding her hand and telling her stories about their life together. "Remember the first time I kissed you?" he asked one evening as she drifted in and out of consciousness. "Up on that hilltop, with the sunset painting everything gold, you were so beautiful that day, Martha. You are still beautiful to me." Martha squeezed his hand weakly and her lips moved. James leaned close to hear her whisper. "Best day of my life," she breathed. "After the day I met you." "No, darling," James said, tears streaming down his weathered face. "The best day was every day I got to wake up beside you." Martha smiled, and then she closed her eyes and slipped away peacefully, her hand still held in James's. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives Martha had touched in one way or another. The church was decorated with embroidered linens that Martha had made over the decades, a beautiful testament to her artistry and generosity. Will gave the eulogy, talking about his mother's strength and kindness and the love she had poured into her family. Rose read a poem she had written about her mother's hands, those skilled hands that had created so much beauty. Henry organized a scholarship fund in Martha's name to help young women in the area pursue education or start businesses. James stood beside Martha's grave after everyone else had left, his children and grandchildren giving him space to say his private goodbye. He placed a single wildflower on the fresh earth, the same kind of flower he had picked for her on their wedding day all those years ago. "I will find you again," he promised quietly. "In whatever comes after this, I will find you and we will build something beautiful together just like we did here." James lived for 3 more years, and though his children worried about his loneliness, he insisted he was never truly alone. "Your mother is with me all the time," he told them. "I feel her in this house, in the land we built together, in each of you. She is not gone. She has just moved ahead to wait for me." He spent his remaining time organizing his affairs, making sure everything was properly divided among his children and grandchildren, and writing letters to each of his descendants explaining their family history and the values he and Martha had tried to instill. He told the story of their meeting over and over to anyone who would listen, making sure the younger generations understood that their family's success had started with one woman's courage to walk 20 miles to save her farm and one man's decision to help her. James Crawford passed away peacefully in his sleep on a warm June night in 1923, exactly 41 years after the day he had first seen Martha walking along that dusty road. His children found him in the morning, lying in the bed he had shared with Martha, a slight smile on his face and his hand stretched out as though reaching for someone. They buried him beside Martha under the oak tree on the hilltop where he had proposed, the spot that overlooked all the land they had built together. The gravestone reads simply, "James and Martha Crawford, they chose love every day." Will inherited the house and the horse ranch, but he made sure the property remained a gathering place for the entire family, just as his parents would have wanted. Rose continued her business and taught embroidery to her daughters and granddaughters, passing on the skills Martha had mastered. Henry ensured that the bank continued to serve the community with the fairness and compassion his father had valued. The embroidered linens Martha had made that fateful summer day in 1882, the ones James had purchased for his sister's wedding, were eventually donated to a museum in Fort Worth, where they remained on display for decades as examples of exceptional 19th-century needlework. The display included the story of how they were sold, how one transaction on a dusty Texas road had sparked a love story that spanned 4 decades and created a family legacy that touched hundreds of lives. Decades passed, and the Crawford family continued to grow and flourish. Martha and James's great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren spread across Texas and beyond, but they always remembered the story of their ancestors and the love that had started it all. Family reunions were held every summer at the ranch, now a sprawling operation run by Will's descendants, and someone always told the story of how James and Martha met, keeping their memory alive for new generations. The old cabin, the first home James had built for his bride, was carefully preserved and eventually designated a historical landmark. Local historians recorded oral histories from the oldest family members, capturing details about life in that time and place, about the challenges families faced, and the ways they supported each other. The story of Martha walking 20 miles to sell her embroidery became a local legend, an example of determination and courage that inspired others facing their own difficulties. In the 21st century, a descendant researching the family history discovered the original receipt James had written for Martha in his notebook, carefully preserved in a box of family documents. The paper was yellowed and fragile, but the handwriting was still clear. Paid to Martha Collins, the sum of $250 for 23 pieces of embroidered linens. June 18, 1882, James Crawford. On the back, in different ink and what appeared to be Martha's handwriting, were the words, "The day my life began." That receipt was framed and hung in the ranch house, a tangible reminder of where everything had started. Visitors to the ranch, whether family or tourists interested in Texas history, would stand before it and imagine that day in 1882, when a young woman set out walking in the heat, carrying her carefully crafted linens and her hopes for saving her family, and when a young cowboy made the decision to stop and help, never knowing that simple act of kindness would bloom into a love that would echo through generations. The land James and Martha had built their life on remained in family hands, passed from parents to children who understood they were not just inheriting property, but a legacy of love and hard work, and choosing each other even when times were difficult. The creek still flowed through the pasture, the oak trees still provided shade, and horses still grazed in the fields, their bloodlines tracing back to the original stock James had bred more than a century before. Every June, on the anniversary of the day James and Martha met, family members would gather at the ranch for a special celebration. They would walk the road where Martha had been trudging along so long ago, though it was paved now and lined with fences and mailboxes. They would end at the hilltop where James and Martha were buried, and someone would place fresh wildflowers on the grave and retell the story, keeping it alive for another year, for another generation. The story of Martha and James Crawford became more than just family history. It became a testament to the power of kindness, the courage required to trust a stranger, and the beautiful things that could grow from a single moment of connection. It reminded people that great love stories did not always start with grand gestures or dramatic circumstances. Sometimes they started with someone offering a ride to a tired woman walking in the heat, seeing her not as a burden but as a person worth helping, worth knowing, worth loving. And in that simple act of stopping, of offering help, of choosing to see another person's worth and potential, James and Martha had created something that lasted far beyond their own lifetimes. They had created a family rooted in love and mutual respect, a legacy of supporting each other through difficulties, and a story that would inspire others to stop, to help, to choose love when the opportunity presented itself. Their great-great-great-grandchildren would grow up hearing about the embroidered linens and the 20-mile walk, about the cowboy who bought everything and drove her home, about the love that grew from that first meeting into something strong enough to weather 40 years and beyond. And some of them, facing their own crossroads and decisions, would think of Martha walking in the heat, would think of James choosing to stop, and would find the courage to take their own chances on love, to offer help to strangers, to build something beautiful from unlikely beginnings. The house that James built and then expanded still stood, renovated and updated but retaining its original character. The main room where James and Martha had spent their wedding night was preserved as it had been, with the fireplace James had built with his own hands and the curtains Martha had embroidered hanging at the windows. Couples would sometimes ask to spend their wedding night there, hoping some of that enduring love would bless their own new marriages. The story lived on in other ways too. A local author wrote a novel based on Martha and James's life, changing names and details, but keeping the heart of their story intact. A filmmaker made a documentary about Texas pioneers that featured their story as an example of how individual families built the state. Schools in the area taught local history using the Crawford family as a case study in homesteading, entrepreneurship, and community building. But perhaps the most important legacy was the simplest one. The understanding passed down through generations that love was not just something that happened to you, but something you built through daily choices and actions. James and Martha had shown their children and grandchildren, and all who came after, that a strong marriage required seeing your partner clearly, appreciating their strengths, supporting them through weaknesses, and choosing them over and over again through all the years. They had shown that respect and friendship were just as important as passion, that laughter and shared work and raising children together could deepen love rather than diminish it, and that growing old together was not something to fear but something to celebrate. They had demonstrated that true partnership meant each person contributing their unique gifts, whether that was skill with horses or talent with a needle, physical strength or emotional intelligence, business acumen or creative vision. The story of how they met, that chance encounter on a dusty road that turned into a lifetime of love, remained fresh and alive because it touched something universal in the human experience. Everyone understood the vulnerability of asking for help, the risk of trusting a stranger, the hope that kindness existed in the world. Everyone could imagine that moment of connection when two people recognized something in each other that resonated, that fit, that felt like coming home. And so the story continued, passed from mouth to ear, written in journals and letters, filmed and photographed and preserved, but most importantly, lived out in the choices made by those who came after. When a Crawford descendant stopped to help a stranded motorist, when they offered friendship to a newcomer in town, when they took a chance on love with someone their family might not immediately understand, they were continuing the legacy that Martha and James had started on that hot June day in 1882. The embroidered linens, those 23 pieces that had represented Martha's hope for saving her family, had long since worn out or been lost to time, all except the one handkerchief James had kept for himself. That single piece remained, carefully preserved behind glass in the ranch house, a tangible link to that first day. The stitching was still perfect after more than a century, each thread placed with Martha's characteristic precision and care, the pattern of roses and vines still clear and beautiful. Sometimes visitors would ask why that one piece had survived when all the others had not. The family explanation was simple. James had carried that handkerchief in his pocket on his wedding day, and Martha had tucked it under her pillow on the night each of their children was born. It had been present for every important moment in their life together, and after James died, Will had taken it and preserved it, understanding that it was more than just a piece of cloth. It was a symbol of everything his parents had built together, starting from that first transaction on a dusty road. The story of Martha and James reminded people that extraordinary lives could come from ordinary moments, that the decision to be kind to a stranger could change the entire trajectory of your life, and that love, real and lasting love, was built through countless small choices rather than a single grand gesture. They had not had an easy life, but they had had a good life, a meaningful life, a life filled with purpose and connection and the deep satisfaction of building something together. Their grave on the hilltop remained a place of pilgrimage for family members and others who found inspiration in their story. People would stand there looking out over the land that Martha and James had worked and improved, at the creek where their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren had played, at the barn that housed the descendants of James's original horses, at the house that had grown from a single cabin into a sprawling family home, and they would understand viscerally what it meant to build a legacy. The oak tree that shaded their resting place had grown massive over the decades, its branches spreading wide and strong, and someone had carved JC plus MC in a heart on the trunk years ago, the letters now stretched and faded but still visible. Under that tree, with the wind whispering through the leaves and the land stretching out in all directions, you could almost feel their presence, the love that had started with a wagon ride and grown into something powerful enough to last through generations. And on summer evenings, when the descendants gathered for reunions or celebrations, when children ran laughing through the fields and adults sat on the porch sharing stories and memories, when the smell of good food drifted from the kitchen and music played, and families who had traveled from far away reconnected, you could feel what Martha and James had created. Not just the physical legacy of land and buildings, but the intangible legacy of love and connection and family bonds strong enough to weather anything. The story that had begun with Martha walking 20 miles to sell her embroidery, with James buying everything and driving her home, had grown into something larger than either of them could have imagined. It had become a testament to the power of kindness and courage, to the beauty of choosing each other, to the importance of building rather than simply inheriting, and to the profound truth that the love between two people could ripple outward and forward to touch lives not yet born. In the end, that was the greatest gift Martha and James had given to those who came after them. Not the land or the money or the successful businesses, but the example of a love well lived, of a partnership built on respect and affection and daily choice, of a life constructed deliberately and lovingly from unpromising beginnings into something beautiful and lasting. They had shown that you did not need perfect circumstances or great wealth or ideal timing to build something meaningful. You just needed courage, determination, and someone who saw your worth and chose to walk beside you. Their story ended as all stories must, with death and goodbye and grief, but it also continued in ways that death could not touch. It continued in the family that bore their name and inherited their values. It continued in the businesses and institutions they had helped build. It continued in the land that still bore the marks of their labor and love. And it continued in the hearts of everyone who heard their story and found in it inspiration for their own lives, permission to take chances on love, courage to trust in kindness, and hope that beautiful things could grow from the simplest beginnings. Martha Collins had walked 20 miles to sell her embroidery. James Crawford had bought everything and driven her home. And from that single day, that one act of kindness and courage, had come a lifetime of love and a legacy that would endure for generations. A testament to the extraordinary things that could happen when two people recognized each other as worth the risk, worth the effort, worth choosing over and over again, until death parted them and love carried on without them.